Today, what we want to do is to try to put together a little overview of the most important biblical site, namely the city of Jerusalem, and then also some of the disciplines that have gone into the geography of the land of Israel, including archaeology, and talk a little bit about tells. For example, behind me, the tell of Beit Shan is located. So let's begin. Jerusalem is mentioned 667 times in the Old Testament and 139 times in the New Testament, a very, very prominent city. Initially, it was situated on two hills. The one hill was the eastern hill, which was the old ancient core. The valley on the east of it was the Kidron Valley. Down in that valley was the Gihon Spring, which was the major water source of the city. And it was bounded on the west by a valley that we simply call the Central or Tyropean Valley. The western, higher hill is bounded on the west by the Hinnom Valley. And the Hinnom starts up at Jaffa Gate and doglegs around and joins the Kidron and eventually flows down to the Salt or to the Dead Sea. Why did they settle on the eastern hill? It's lower. However, that is where the major water source is, the Gihon Spring. That area that's bounded by the Kidron on the east and the Central Valley on the west, I like to call the old ancient core. It's about 15 acres in size. So if you figure about 100 people per acre, Jerusalem was a city of about 1,000, 2,000 people, probably at the most. The history of Jerusalem goes back, way back into the 1800s. We realize that it was Abram who met Melchizedek at the city of Salem. And later in the Psalms, Salem is equated with the city of Jerusalem. We also read that Abram brought his son Isaac to the mountains of Moriah, and there bound Isaac, willing to sacrifice him. And later, when Solomon is building his temple, in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, we find that he's doing this on Mount Moriah, so that old temple mountain is associated with the binding of Isaac. We also find in the Elamarna letters, it's mentioned 6 different times. We realize that it was General Joab who gained access to the city via the Sinor. David made it his personal possession, a neutral city. And so this became the capital of the Judean monarchy throughout its whole history. The reason Jerusalem is important is not because it was on the International Coastal Highway or the Transjordanian Highway, but because Solomon built the temple there. It was the place where God chose to put his name, and the presence of the true and living God came to reside there in his temple. And from that point on, Jerusalem has been on the forefront of the monotheistic faiths. The history of Jerusalem, it was attacked on many occasions. I think of one right after the death of Solomon by Pharaoh Shishak in 925. Shishak is a name that not too many people recognize, but if you listen carefully to the beginning of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, you'll find that they believe Shishak took the Ark of the Covenant to Egypt. Ooh, this is good material. In any case, he probably didn't do that, but the city was attacked by Shishak. He did not actually destroy the city. After Shishak, what we find is that on numerous occasions, Jerusalem was attacked. The Israelite kingdom on the north occasionally attacked it. The Arameans from up in the Damascus area attacked it. But it was, of course, the Assyrian, Sennacherib, who laid siege to it in 701. And it was Hezekiah's prayer and the relief of that siege. We find, too, that the Babylonians are attacking Jerusalem a little bit later. And Jeremiah is prophesying that the Judeans literally should give up to the Babylonians. This didn't go over well with the populace of Jerusalem, but they were thinking back. Listen, God has chosen to put his name here. This is the place that was defended back in 701 against Sennacherib. Our theology is correct. Our history is correct. We can do anything we want. But Jeremiah goes to the temple precincts, Jeremiah chapter 7. And when these people come in and say, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, Jeremiah says, your worship needs to be right and your obedience needs to be right. And the Lord, through Jeremiah, even says, let's go to Shiloh on a field trip, the place where the tabernacle had been located. What's going on there? In Jeremiah's day, it was a ruin. And so God was pronouncing judgment on the wicked city of Jerusalem. And of course, in 586, the Babylonians conquered the city, sacrifices ceased, and it won't be until the days of Zerubbabel that the temple will be rebuilt. With Zerubbabel in 516 building the temple, that second temple lasts until AD 70, when it is destroyed by the Romans. And so along the way, you have Herod refurbishing that temple, you have Jesus in the temple precincts, you have the early church meeting there. With the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, sacrifices cease. However, the Jewish population soon later, revolts in 132, and in 135, the Roman emperor decides enough of this revolution in the southeastern corner of my empire. He removes all the Jews from Jerusalem. He renames the place Aelia Capitolina, and that was its name for hundreds of years until the Muslim conquest. So this is a very short synopsis of the history of Jerusalem. I commend to you a good book on Jerusalem or chapters on Jerusalem. It's a very, very, very fascinating study.